Good morning, folks. We are in Genesis chapter 11 today. We're going to attempt to begin our study of the Tower of Babel, which is found in this chapter. And we've been studying about Noah and the flood in our verse-by-verse study of Genesis now for several weeks. But today we're breaking off and we're making a transition. And actually, this is a major turning point in the book of Genesis. We go from the flood and Noah and his family and the after the flood period. Now we're breaking off into a section of scripture that tells us how all of the generations after Noah, which way they went spiritually. Not as much physically, but spiritually. And I'm going to be showing you some maps and some modern day photographs of the area that we're going to be talking about today, and some ruins of towers in the Mesopotamia, in that area of the world where the Tower of Babel was located. The Tower of Babel's gone, matter of fact, Brother Don, I kind of got a chuckle out of some of the preachers that I was reading this week of how many of them say that they found the Tower of Babel. They found Noah's Ark and the Tower of Babel, the same preachers. So I guess they're just better than the rest of us to be able to do that. But I did learn a lot from reading about this from some of these people who've actually traveled to the area where the ziggurats are, the towers, and learned the purpose of these towers and what they are. And actually, it helped me understand more of chapter 11. So I'll share some of that with you in a few minutes. So bear with us. We're going to read the first 9 verses of Genesis chapter 11. Genesis 11, verse 1. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one. They have all one language. This they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Most of you are familiar with this text and this event in history and how it happened, but today we're going to cover some things that you may have either studied a long time ago or have forgotten, or maybe you haven't studied it before, and it'll be a good refresher course for all of us, whether you've studied it before or not. And we're going to learn some things about this event in that time shortly after Noah and the ark and the descendants of Noah started multiplying and spreading across the earth. Let me look at my notes here, make sure I stay on track. Let's see. I want to remind you of something, that Babel and that beginning of that city, and not just that city, but other cities in that area that were started at the same time by the same people, these cities and that region became what became known later as Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon. And the Babel was not just a tower. It was the beginning of something bigger and more expanded than just a tower. And it was more than just a city. The Babylonian Empire that developed from this would become a tool that God would use to chastise his children, called the Jews, to bring them into submission and be obedient with him when they would disobey him. We know that we are studying on Sunday afternoons. We're studying the book of Ezra, and we remember that God used Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, to come and carry off the Jews and take them to Babylon to be prisoners, to be slaves. So God used this Babylonian kingdom many times to discipline the Jewish people and to show them that God means business. Babylon would go on to, in later years, to represent not just a geographical location, okay, that's now in the country of Iraq, but it would represent more than that. It would represent a world system that was anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-Scripture, anti-anything that God represented. That's what Babylon developed into. What's strange is, what's kind of ironic is, that's how it began. Babel, the Tower of Babel, the building of it, and the whole motivation behind it. I think Daddy needs to help with the baby. The tower, the whole building of Babel had the purpose of going against God's instructions. We'll give Brother Don just a minute here. Did you boys like the helicopter in the parking lot this morning? Yeah, I think there was a lot of excitement. Miss Frida had a little too much excitement. She thought one of us were being carted off. And don't forget to pray for this lady who was being medevaced out. It's serious when they have to call in a helicopter, and as everybody here knows. So pray for these folks. Let's get into the verses here. But before we get into chapter 11, we need to jump backwards. We need to look at chapter 10, okay? Because the person that was the instigator, the founder, the architect behind this whole system was the man Nimrod. And we need to go back to chapter 10, and so we can see that, all right? Chapter 10, we'll just read just 2 or 3 verses, starting at verse 6. Chapter 10, verse 6. This is talking about the descendants of Noah. Here's the line of Ham. Verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Ramah, and Sabteka, and the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. And God gives us some insight into this man Nimrod here. You notice how every now and then he breaks away and doesn't just list names. He actually stops and shows you something extra. Here's the information about Nimrod. Verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. Now remember, Ham, son of Noah, had a son named Cush. Cush had a son named Nimrod. Don't forget that. That's very important. So Noah, Ham, Cush, Nimrod. Nimrod is Noah's great-grandson. Don't forget that. And he's in the line of Ham, which we know Ham had a rebellious streak in him. That's what caused him to react the way he did when he found his father in a compromised situation. So let's keep reading. Verse 9. Speaking of Nimrod, verse 8, I'm sorry. the middle of the verse, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah, etc., etc., etc. So it didn't just stop at Nimrod and Babel, but there were 4 cities developed and came up that were founded by Nimrod, okay? And verse 10 says, in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So 4 towns, 4 cities were started. The building of them, the establishing of them was started by Nimrod. Nimrod was a man that was very infamous. He was very famous, but he had a problem. He had come from a line of family that taught him many wrong things, obviously. We know that the line of Ham, there are some problems. Obviously, the man Cush taught his children and passed on to them wicked teachings and wicked mentality and wicked ideas and philosophies. The man Nimrod was named Nimrod by his father, and what's interesting is Cush named his son Nimrod, and Nimrod means let us revolt. Let us rebel or let us revolt. That's the meaning of his name. His name means rebel. That's a sad thing that a father would name his son a name like that, but it shows something about Cush, doesn't it? It shows what Nimrod was taught and the kind of home he lived in. It tells us a lot. Makes me want to ask you a question, and I will ask you very bluntly, what is the priority for you and your family, for your children and your grandchildren? Is it to have a godly heritage, or is it to be well known in the world and have lots of money and all of those kind of things? You see the problem? Nimrod was taught from a family that instilled in him the wrong principles of life, the wrong philosophies of life, the wrong priorities. And they even named him something that, and the folks, you know how important the meaning of names was in those days. The meaning of their name was extremely important. And not always, but many times, they would go on to fulfill the meaning of that name in their lifetime. And I believe, this is just my opinion here, I can't prove this, but it sure appears to me that when you see this kind of situation, especially in the scripture, when someone is named something like this and they go on to fulfill that name, it could be because that's what the parents taught them. That was what was drilled into them, that's the kind of life they need to live. It was as if the parents couldn't fulfill it in themselves, so they fulfilled their dream of being wicked or well-known or rich or whatever in their children. I mean, it happens today, doesn't it? How many parents do you know who live wicked lives, but the thing they're teaching their children is to live even more wicked? They live more wickedly than the parents, and they're proud of that. I know folks in prison right now who have children who are in prison, who have grandchildren who are in prison. It's been a family tradition. And they laugh about it. They think it's humorous. Oh, well. They just laugh about it. It's sad. It really is. It doesn't have to be that way. Everybody makes their own decisions. But unless God intervenes in a person's life, most of the time they're going to follow that. But if they'll just listen to God, He'll change their direction, won't He? So we know that this problem Nimrod had probably started with his father, and that started with his father, and it was passed down through the family line of Ham. And there's rebellion that was already started in that family line through Ham. Let's keep going. I'll try to keep moving if I can. Try not to get too sidetracked. I want you to think about Nimrod some more, okay? Because it's important that we understand the man in order to understand what was founded by him. He became very prosperous in the world. He became a well-known man. As a matter of fact, if you go back to chapter 10 of Genesis and read verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. First part of verse 9, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. A mighty hunter before the Lord. A mighty one has the idea that he was not just a strong man, but he was powerful, a warrior, and even a tyrant. And we'll see that in the end, in the places he established, and the system he established shows that he was a tyrant. I believe that Nimrod had so much influence over people, he made a very good dictator. I really believe that. He was mighty in the world. People knew him. He had a reputation as a great hunter. But listen, I don't know, and the Bible doesn't tell us this, but a man like that goes to his head. He gets filled with pride. I mean, we see it over and over in life and in the Bible. He gets filled with pride, and before you know it, he is using that celebrity status that he's developed in his life, where everybody praises him and says, wow, there's Nimrod, and look what a great man he is, and all the stories they tell that get exaggerated, of course. And before long, Nimrod turns into a man that he never planned to be, but at the same time, he did. And it happens to the best of people too. Not just the ones who plan to be wicked, but it happens to righteous people too. And this man was definitely on the road to worldly success, but far, far away from God. As a matter of fact, let me show you a cross-reference here. Let me find it real quick. First Chronicles chapter 1 in verse 10. I wrote it down. Hold on just a minute. Let me find my reference here. It says that, and Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be mighty upon the earth. Okay? The statement is repeated about Nimrod and Cush, even over in Chronicles. And we know that the carrying on of those family lines and all that is mentioned in Chronicles, and you should investigate that for your own study. But he was mighty. I believe Nimrod was a mighty man in the process of doing evil, and in the process of doing this before the Lord, because we see that it's mentioned this was before the Lord. Now, this phrase can be used several different ways in the Bible. At least two different ways that are most prominent. One, there are people in the Bible who say that they were great before the Lord, they were righteous before the Lord, or they were wicked before the Lord. So before the Lord can mean two different things. It depends on the context. You have to read the context to figure out what's the intention of the statement. But before the Lord, in Nimrod's case, meant right before God's eyes, right in front of God. You may say he did it right in God's face. He lived a wicked life in God's face, and which is a terrible thing, a testimony to have. But he was a mighty hunter, and he did it before the Lord. You can be sure that God did not miss or not pay attention to the life that Nimrod was living. All of this was noticed by God. That you can be sure of. And as the reaction from God in heaven to Babel shows you that God was paying attention. That God was definitely paying attention to the situation, and he took action. And we'll talk about that when we get to that part, which is kind of surprising for some people. All right, I'm going to skip. I've got several things I wanted to share, but I'm going to skip it. I'm going to try to speed up here just a little bit. Let's go over to chapter 11. We're going to see the actual construction of the tower, or the place called Babel. Okay? In verse 1 of chapter 11, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east. Now pay attention. Who is they? If you notice, we've just finished chapter 10, where the genealogies of Noah's sons is given. And we find out the chapter ends with Shem's descendants. But we know that Nimrod is not a descendant of Shem. Nimrod is a descendant of Ham. So some of Ham's descendants through Cush went into the area that's known today as Mesopotamia. It's known Iraq and Iran, just in that region in the Middle East is where they settled. Notice it says, and it came to pass, verse 2, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. I'll show you some maps in a minute why that they would settle there. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But let me just remind you of something, though, that what this place Babel stood for. Okay, because we are given extremely detailed information about a process of construction here that is interesting. Verses 3 and 4, especially verse 3, God has given us, through the man Moses, who recorded this for us, some information about people who built buildings out of a special kind of brick. Now you think, well, what's important about that? I'm going to show you. It's extremely important that you get this, because we know that the Egyptians had the children of Israel, years later after this, they had the children of Israel making bricks out of mud or slime and straw. Remember that? When you study Moses and you study the children of Israel and their 400 years in Egypt, they made brick out of mud and straw. They were not especially strong. Okay, the bricks weren't especially strong. Nothing special. These bricks in Shinar, in Mesopotamia, which is much further east from Egypt, much further east, they have a different process of making bricks because they have different materials to use to make them from. Now, they still used mud or clay, but they molded it and made it with tar, or what we would call something like asphalt, all right? Because there were tar pits, or asphalt pits they're called, in that whole area of the Middle East. Hint, oil wells. Think about it. Some of the richest nations in the world, or at least not nations, richest rulers in the world of those nations, are the rulers of the oil nations. Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they've got tar pits. They got it oozing out of the ground. You know, that black gold Texas tea stuff that comes out of the ground, right? Yeah, from the oil wells that are underneath the ground, the oil reservoirs there. And they had this tar, this thick tar type material that they could use to put the bricks together. Instead of just putting them together with mud, they put them together and molded and made a building using that as their mortar between the bricks, and it made the buildings extremely strong. Plus, look what verse 3 says. And they said one to another, see, they had a gathering of all the people, and they've talked it over, and they said, "Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly." They're fired bricks. Fired bricks. The Egyptians didn't use fired bricks at the time the children of Israel were there. Fired bricks are much stronger. Fired bricks, they had kilns and furnaces where they actually dried the bricks and fired them to make them hard. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. This slime is that tarry type material that was coming out of the ground in these pits everywhere. And you'll see it mentioned, as a matter of fact, one of the battles around Sodom and Gomorrah, you'll find in the scriptures later that there was a battle fought in that area, and some of the kings who were fleeing with their armies fell in some pits there around the Dead Sea, where there are oil reservoirs as well. And there are tar pits there, and they fell in them, and they were trapped, and all kinds of things. Until you've actually seen it, it's amazing. That, matter of fact, some nations used, back in those days, they used these tar pits as a way to trap their enemy or to protect themselves from the enemy. They would actually make moats, with these, like a canal, and run this tar through there, and so that they couldn't cross it. They could set it on fire. It was useful for all kinds of things. Just amazing. So, anyway, back to the story. Now, back to the story is where I need to go, because I've got to get myself back on track. So we know that they have come up with a new kind of building material that makes very strong buildings and that kind of thing. That's the ingenuity, the technology that they used was something new and something that made them have an advantage. Listen, they prospered. They were prosperous people for several reasons. They were prosperous, and prosperous meaning they had wealth. These people were wealthy in some ways because of the building material they had, gave them advantage. All right, you can ship that and take that to other places. People will buy it. They used it to build their own buildings, but they also exported it. That's one reason. The second reason is water. Just a simple thing of water. Most of us know that a lot of the Middle East is desert. Desert and rocky mountains, rock outcrop mountains. Rugged country. But you put a river through there and it changes everything. You've got a way to transport goods, a way to travel down the river and up the river. You also have clean drinking water all the time, which is you have to have to survive. Why all these towns and cities and villages were built along the rivers? Yeah. The city we lived in Europe, in Poland, was built on the Vistula River. All the cities were built on the rivers, in the old days especially. Even around here. Tell me something. What has been the success of that old town just east of us, about 35 miles, called? What? Madison. The river, and other geological things that have happened there, but the river was the main success for that town, and it's what gave it life because of the boat traffic, the crossings, and all those things. It makes a difference, and that's just in recent history. In the old days, we call it in Bible times, it was extremely important to be located near water. And if it was a river, that was an extra plus. You didn't just have water, but you had travel. And it made all the difference. Plus you had some protection too. But the beginning of this place called Babel, we've already read over in chapter 10, verse 10, that this place that Nimrod founded, he started his kingdom, okay? The beginning of his kingdom. Notice that. Was Babel and the other three cities that they established in the land of Shinar. This same area, the same geographical location is where Babylon developed from. The same place. Like I said, we'll get back into that in just a minute, but I'm going to keep reminding you of that. This area was known, and still is today as far as studying history, this area is known as the Fertile Crescent. I'll show you on a map in a minute. Why is it called the Fertile Crescent? It wasn't desert because of the rivers. The Tigris River and the Euphrates River and everything in between them. That whole area, those plains, those flatlands, we call them bottomlands, don't we? What do we call Austin what? Austin bottoms, right? Because you've got lowland that has water in it. This lowland near the Euphrates River and the Tigris River was rich soil, and it was watered well, and it had green. It had green around it. It wasn't dry like the desert area beyond it. So it was a great place to settle. Shinar became one of the great kingdoms. This is where we see the Medes and the Persians come from that established the great Babylonian Empire and all of those things. And it came out of this whole region called the Fertile Crescent. And so the city of Babylon came from this area. So it's not just the location, but their wealth and their prosperity came from having water, having travel, having building materials that were, and had an advantage over everybody else because of the slime and the way they made their bricks. So they could build things in such a way that gave them great advantages. All right? So they became very prosperous. You don't see all of that mentioned here, but it's subtly mentioned. It's in a subtle way. We see that God says, He told us how they made the bricks. Well, that tells us something about the people. Not only were they intelligent, but that they became prosperous because of this process. It made a difference. Some of the greatest business empires in the world have come from simple things like learning how to do something a different way. Think about it. How many wealthy, filthy rich millionaire people in this world have come from just something like this? And they develop great power because of their money. Great power. All right. The land of Shinar. The land of Shinar is what's called modern day Iraq, between the two rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And their prosperity had a great influence on what developed there as far as their religion and their outlook on life and their philosophies of who God is and whether they'll submit to Him. So this area became a very rebellious area. As a matter of fact, just a little hint, a spoiler for in the few chapters we're going to study soon. Where did Abraham come from? Abram came from Ur of the Chaldees, which is on the southern edge of this area called Mesopotamia. The area where Babel and these other places were, it's right on the southern edge of that. So Abram was very familiar in his day later on, a few hundred years later, he was very familiar with these things that happened here. I say a few hundred. It's not many years later we'll find the man Abraham in our study. But he lived in the same area, and God moved him out of that area to get him away from that. Now, let me ask you a question. This area of wealth and prosperity and being famous that Nimrod developed into, this thing that he developed a reputation for, being a great hunter and a mighty man and all of that, had great influence and power over people. He could become a leader of the people and they would follow him. That's why he could build a place like Babel and the other places, because he had influence and they followed him because they bowed to him and they thought he was just a fantastic fellow and all of that. It's kind of like the Hollywood people today, right? Our young people in the world follow either athletes who are well known or Hollywood people or some kind of other well-known people. When they become well-known, everybody wants to be like them. It's not changed, folks. Same way in Nimrod's day as it is today. People will believe that these folks are, just because they're popular, they must be great people, so I want to be like them. And that's what happened there. Nimrod was one of those people. I can imagine that he's one of those fellas that when he came through town, everybody knew he was coming. Everybody knew he was coming. And they would all gather around and want to take pictures with their phones and all that stuff when Nimrod came to town. They were watching him, right? Okay, just check and see if you're awake. This prosperity that they had was not a bad thing. I mean, it's not sinful to have possessions. It's not sinful to have money. It's not sinful to even be rich. But the problem is the tendencies that come with it. Usually, when people have every need met, they never have to want for anything. They develop an attitude of not needing God as well. And that's what wealth will do. And prosperity and being famous and all of that. They get to thinking about self all the time and they forget about God. They don't want God in their life. These folks, remember, this is just the great-grandson of Noah. The command that God gave Noah, and back in chapter 9, verse 1, that they were to cover the earth and replenish the earth and repopulate the earth. Not to concentrate in one area and not move, but they were to spread out and populate the earth. That command was still fresh. Don't forget that. As a matter of fact, there's a very strong possibility, and I believe it's absolutely true, that Noah was still alive. All right? He lived another 350 years after the flood. And some people say that, let me get my timeline right in my head here now, before I make a statement that I'm going to be sorry for. If I'm not mistaken, I'm going by memory. I should have written it down. If I'm not mistaken, Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and when he was reaching the end of his life overlapped with Abraham's. Maybe some people say that he died 2 years before Abraham was born, and other theologians say Noah died when Abraham was 58 years old. So somewhere right in there, it was real close. So all of this message from God through the man Noah was still fresh. It hadn't been that long, especially since those people are still alive. And you can imagine if Noah was living, then his sons were still living, and the message was still going out. So this message was still pretty fresh to them, and Nimrod had to have heard what everybody was saying that God told them to do. They had instructions. They had a command from God. And Nimrod decided he didn't want that in his life. He didn't want to obey. So this prosperity was not a bad thing. But prosperity without submission to God's authority leads to wickedness, leads to rebellion. That's a very important truth we can take from this text, okay? Now, I'm not going to get finished with this, but I want to tie up with just a couple of things here. I want you to pay attention to, I'm going to show you a couple of maps of the area so that you can get it in your head where we're talking about, okay? And I want you to try to remember that it's not that the area, the geographical location was not a wicked place. Okay, a place is not wicked. It's the people who are in that place. That's where the wickedness comes from. But the prosperity that this region of the world had because of the water, because of the notoriety that Nimrod had, and because of the building of the buildings, the way they could build with the materials they had, it caused them to be very successful people. And Nimrod was no exception. He was not. I don't know that Nimrod was a successful builder. The Bible doesn't tell us that. It just says the beginning of his kingdom was, and it tells you those 4 towns that were established by Nimrod. That was just the beginning of his kingdom. So I don't know that he was a great builder, but we know that he was a great hunter. He was a mighty man. He was one who was well known, and everybody even made up a motto to compare. If you're a great hunter, you're like the great hunter Nimrod. Nimrod was well known everywhere, and the things that he promoted and stood for would have been promoted too, would have been followed. Let me show you a map here, okay? Let me see if I can find my pointer. And of course, I don't know where it is. I don't see it. All right, you're just going to have to look. You see the green area? That's called Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent. On the left that little green part coming down on the left, that's where Israel is today, that area. Jordan, Syria, Israel. That's the Mediterranean Sea on the left side, the blue is. The green is where it starts from Israel, southern Israel, and goes all the way up around, up through Damascus, up through southern Turkey, and then back down. And that big wide part that comes down at an angle there, that's where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are. And they're on each side of that, and everything along those rivers and between them is well watered. It wasn't desert. It was well watered, and it became a very wealthy area because of their slime pits, okay, allowing them to build bricks and buildings differently and stronger, and also because they had water. They had water and ways to travel, so they could communicate and they could transport their goods very easily. And it became extremely important. That area became one of the wealthiest parts of the world very quickly after the flood. So, Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent, it might be called by some people. Let me show you another map so you can see another view of it. A little close up. On the left, you've got Israel, and then it circles around. As a matter of fact, remember, we will study this someday real soon, but some of you know this already. When Abraham traveled to Israel, to the Canaan land, he didn't just cut straight across. Okay? He couldn't do that. The terrain would not allow him to do that. Let me show you something. Ur of Chaldees, right there. Jerusalem. Straight across would be a lot shorter, wouldn't it? But you can't cross it. You couldn't in those days. Desert and high mountains. Too difficult. When you traveled there, you had to go way up here and come down. That's how everybody traveled. Everybody. So the traveling was not, that's an unimportant point, but it shows you something. This whole area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that whole area there was well known because it was easy to travel. And transportation was a huge thing. And it caused the people there to have great wealth. And can you imagine having a little boat of some kind, and you've got travelers coming along and they want to cross the river? You charge them anything you want to cross that river in your boat. And they pay it because there was nobody else. And that became big business, going up, down the river, all of that. Okay. Now, there's something interesting I want to show you that doesn't really matter, but the next map will show you better about it. You see that water right here? You can't tell it, but there's a dark blue line right there. That's where the water ends today. Let me show, this map will show it a little better. Okay? The coastline today is down here. But in those days, in Nimrod's day and in Abram's day, the water actually came way up here, right up next to where the Tower of Babel was built. So I'm trying to think of the body of water. Can anybody help me? Let me back up, see if I can see it here. Persian Gulf. Everybody knows what it is. I just couldn't think of it. The Persian Gulf, the shoreline of the Persian Gulf is much further back, further down now, further south. Some of that's been filled in. What is it? What is that place called at the mouth of the Mississippi River? You know that big plain that's there filled with rich black dirt? Yep. Yeah. Down at the Gulf of Mexico where the Mississippi River empties out into the Gulf, that whole area is filled with silt and very, very rich dirt. That kind of filled in. It fills in after years and years and years. These rivers carried all that silt, all that fertile crescent soil from up there and carried it down, and it just keeps building it out, and they filled it in as well. And that area became filled in so that the Persian Gulf backed up. It wasn't able to come inland so far. So all of these cities that were built on the water's edge became out in the middle of nowhere. They were settled in dry land. All right. Just something interesting. I don't know if it really matters, but it's the geography of that area changed over the years after Babel was built. Let's see here. I think I'm going to have to stop there. Yeah, I better stop. We will start again at verse 4, chapter 11, verse 4, next time. And we're going to talk more about the construction and Nimrod just a little bit more, because Nimrod is an important character in this whole story. That's where he's the one who started it all. And we need to learn a little bit more about Nimrod, but we're going to learn a lot more about the Tower of Babel and what it was stood for. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that the Tower of Babel was actually a temple where people came and worshiped. But it wasn't as much of a temple as it was a dwelling place for their gods. Did you know that the tower called Babel, that became the Tower of Babel, there were other towers in that area? As a matter of fact, they have found 32 towers, the ruins of 32 towers in that whole Fertile Crescent area. 32 that have been found. I wonder how many haven't been found, because they get covered. After they quit being, they're not used anymore, and a new country comes in and takes over. What happened? Who remembers what happened when I'm trying to think of those wicked fellows' names that back when Saddam Hussein was in power over Iraq. The Taliban. That's what I'm trying to think of. There was another group with the Taliban. They were all extreme, wicked Muslims who went around killing everybody. When they took over Iraq and certain areas of Iraq, any kind of religious monument to any other religion that was left in their area of control, they destroyed them. There was a huge statue of Buddha in one of the regions of the northern part of Iraq or somewhere there. I don't know the exact location, but I remember it well. We were in Europe when it happened, and the Taliban went in and wired it with explosives and blew it to smithereens, because it was another god that they wouldn't tolerate having around. And of course, all the historical people in the world, oh no, you've destroyed a historical thing, and all that mess. I don't care if they blow up a Buddha, but it was a big deal to the world. But you have one group come in, what are they going to do? They're going to destroy their gods, or they're going to start worshiping them, one or the other. And that area has gone through many transitions over the years. So most of the towers have either deteriorated because of just age, because everything needs upkeep, even the Tower of Babel needed upkeep, or somebody would come in and destroy it. So that's why many ruins probably haven't even been found of some of these. But we'll talk more about that next time, and we'll learn more about the purpose of the Tower of Babel, what it was really for, and why it got God's attention. Why did God react so strongly about them building a tower? We're going to learn more about that next time, okay? Let's pray, and if somebody can get the video for me after we pray, I'd appreciate it. Father, thank you so much for your goodness and your faithfulness, for your holy word. Help us, Father, to obey you. When we read something in your word, when we learn a truth, a principle from your word, that we would apply that to our lives, and we would try to live to please you in this short life we have here. In Jesus' name, amen.